do you feel like you've ever been looked at as a trespasser in this space?
I've always been looked at as a trespasser. I am not an insider. I am a divergent thinker by nature. I am a contrarian by nature. I do not like the status quo, and it doesn't bother me sitting in a room listening to dogma and tradition to just go against that grain. But on the inside, yes, they looked like my friends, but there was something missing. And I think that's what has so many people talking about this event and exploring it, because you're right. He had, access to every resource. But what was really missing throughout all of that, and he kind of talks about it in his book, it was just a deep disconnect from feeling wanted.
All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Hart Hustle Podcast. I am incredibly excited to have my guest here today, David Whitesock. Now, on this podcast, we talk about the heart and the hustle of what is necessary to not only build a business, but to live a life of full fulfillment. And so being able to bring David on to the show today is going to be an awesome experience for everybody who's listening and everybody who's watching. We're going to learn a little bit more about David, his mission inside the behavioral health space, but we're also going to talk about some things that are important in today's work environment, like work culture, innovation, as well as some of the soft skills that it takes to be able to build an organization in this ever-changing landscape of business today. So David is a former adjunct professor at the University of South Dakota, former chief innovation officer at Face It Together, and currently the CEO and founder of Commonly Well. Now, Commonly Well is a recovery intelligence firm, a data analytics company, and advisory firm. They help behavioral health organizations figure out their data practices and outcome models, and they weaponize, a keyword, that data to help people, those organizations create better outcomes in delivering care for their clients and patients. David, thank you so much for joining me, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Kingdom. This is going to be fun. I appreciate the invitation.
Absolutely. So David, what are you excited about right now, either in your personal life or professional life? What's got you kind of amped up?
Well, I think because so much of what I do around my professional life is based upon my personal journey, those two things are intertwined. So I'll say what has me excited is that finally, after having worked in the field of addiction care and recovery support, building a data-driven peer support organization, finally seeing the rest of the field get to the point where people are actually making decisions off of real data, as opposed to just their gut and their own intuition because they happen to be a person in addiction recovery. So that's what's got me excited. It's an interesting place to be, to watch people kind of learn and sort of stumble through a learning process and trying to get their feet underneath them. And of course, we're in the early stages of bringing generative AI into all of this. So it feels to me, because I'm old enough, like the early days of the Commodore 64 and the Atari, when we were just figuring out, these are advanced games and these are computers. And then of course I was, building websites in the mid 90s and late 90s. And so it feels like another one of those moments of something really big and new coming to the world. So I'm really excited about what the next 5 to 10, 15 years are going to look like.
Man, that's an awesome topic. I was recently talking to a younger entrepreneur who I met up with the other day. He's 21 years old, and he was talking about his business experience thus far. And one of the topics of conversations that I brought up was the ability to recognize patterns. And as I've gotten a little bit older, 33 years old now, I've started to see some of these patterns that come up, right? And so hearing you talk about those early Atari days and seeing another one of these iterations that we're going through kind of is a great topic of discussion for our first segment, which is really going to be innovation. So as you've kind of gone through your professional and personal growth process, when you see things like AI popping up and people have the instantaneous reaction of this is going to be horrible for everybody, or this is going to be something that's going to be amazing. It reminds me of the early internet days when people thought the internet was going to be a fad and there wasn't going to be a real necessary use case for it. So when you talk about generative AI, from a pattern recognition perspective, what other similarities can you kind of bring together with other technologies that you've seen in the past that are going to have a huge impact on the future?
I'll mention two, because one, I had a direct relationship in building, and the other one I think all of us use on a day-to-day basis. That's pretty ubiquitous now. So I'll start with the latter first. That is email. So I remember in 1994 when I went to college the first time as a freshman, sitting down in the computer lab and getting my email address and sort of just checking in on it maybe once every couple of days and not really fully understanding what that was going to mean for communication. And of course, the big thing then was, well, we're not going to need mail anymore. Right. All mail is going to go away and the post office is just going to disappear and it's going to be bad for jobs and all of this stuff. And I think what we learned was, no, that's totally not true. We need both those modes of communication, digital and the analog. So that's one. And just seeing how my classmates and people my age and even older kind of embrace that mode of communication. I mean, I'm Gen X, so I have people I know who still write very formal emails, like it's a written letter, as opposed to your age or younger, where an email is like in some weird code of short speak, right? Yeah. So that's one. The other is podcasting. So I was very fortunate that in 2004, 2005, I was one of the first maybe 100 in the world who were innovating around podcasting. It got to a point where it got the attention of the New York Times because we had 5 podcasts and we were early innovators. I was a former radio guy. So it made sense to just go and say, I can't broadcast anymore with a tower in my backyard, but I've got this internet thing here and I can push this out through RSS, really simple syndication. And that's what generative AI feels like. We don't quite know what it is. Anybody can kind of do it if they feel like it. Anybody can sort of make a business on it if they've got the entrepreneurial attitude. So that's what those two things feel like, because they're two that I've was right there at the early days of, and we don't know what generative AI is going to be. We don't know what AI is going to turn into. We're using the first thing we've got in front of us, but it's going to be completely something that we can't imagine yet.
I love the topic of podcasting because over the last, let's say 3 years, right, the pandemic really exploded, from my perspective, podcasting and people using this medium of communication to disseminate information into the ecosystem of the world, right? And when I think about it, I think how important content really is in all of our lives. If you're a business leader, if you're a team member, if you're somebody who's just trying to spread awareness around your mission, content and the ability to produce and put it out into the world is so incredibly important. And you being an early radio guy, do you see a disconnect between business leaders today and their content strategy to be able to be visible in front of people and to get in front of more eyeballs? What does that kind of look like from your perspective?
It's not so much whether or not the strategy is really connected to content, their business strategy connected to a content strategy. That's a mess. That's just a given for most. It's just kind of a mess. What I tend to see that kind of makes me wonder about the different technologies that are being used is who the audience is that you're trying to speak to. So I see a lot of people start a podcast, but they just do it because everybody else has a business podcast, right? As opposed to, well, why should my podcast exist for our specific business? So the way we're thinking about it on our end is we don't have a podcast. We do a lot of podcasts. We're on a lot of them because there's a lot of people doing really great stuff like you are. That makes sense. The way we're thinking about podcast is as a technology to deliver our content to our customers. So private, distribution of audio because it's a much more intimate means. And so if we've got very complex, say, manuals or tutorials, why not deliver it in video? Why not deliver it in a PDF? Why not deliver it in audio? Because you could sit in your car, sit on the train, walk to work, and listen to the thing that you need to learn. And you can get it in a very intimate way. And by the time you get to the office, you can open up the thing and be like, okay, David was just telling me how to do this. I got it. I listened to the first 2 chapters. I'm going to now do it. And that's, I think, if people think a little bit more creatively about these things, as opposed to just let's blast to the world first, maybe start with your audience that needs to get what you have, and play with the medium a little bit and sort of how you use it, as opposed to, oh, this is going to build our business, but maybe it can be your business.
I think that's beautiful, because one of the things I think about is I follow a very predominant, I would say, internet influencer here in Las Vegas. There's a company called Think Media, and one of their primary spokespeople, or personalities, if you will, is this guy named Omar. And he talks about podcasting and content today is a way to be able to build relationships. And especially in this world of disconnection and isolation, especially because everybody's working from home offices like we are today, it's very difficult to be able to network with people and rub elbows in the ways in which previous generations did. But he's like, if somebody spends 300 hours of time with you, you basically have formed a personal, intimate relationship with them. And it's a great way to be able to kind of focus off of, or crescendo off of, another person who I follow on LinkedIn, a guy named Matthew Ray Scott. He talks about it's so important to help people today help know, like, and trust you. And the ability to create that know, like, and trust is through the dissemination of valuable information and content to help people understand your mission, but be able to communicate with them on an intimate fashion. Being able to drive to work and throw a podcast on and have that intimate time together, right, when you're driving to work, builds that relationship. And I think that's just so tactical and so efficient in being able to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I like that. And I think it also comes down to, do you have something to say? And if you have something to say, can you say it consistently? Can you say it in a number of different ways? Because not everybody's going to get the thing that you say the way you say it the first time. So, I'm a trained lawyer, and also as a trained broadcaster, a professional broadcaster. You have to think through, what are the different ways that I can say this thing that is going to get somebody's attention. And the nice thing about our digital world is I can write the same thing 3 or 4 different times. Now I can use generative AI to take the first thing I write and say, give me 4 variations of this theme, please. And then I can drip that, spread them out 10 days apart. And I can add that to my distribution flow. So I've got something relatively fresh, but not necessarily, but it might hit a different audience. And if we're going to drop people that we like, someone I like to watch and follow on LinkedIn is Chris Walker. He's, business to business revenue. And he says the same thing. It's like, you can't go into this thinking that a specific piece of marketing or content is going to get them to go to your website, click a form, fill out the information, and buy your thing. It doesn't work like that. You have to keep information in the feed. You don't know when people are going to be ready to like you, want you, buy your thing. And you just have to keep showing up. And eventually, when it resonates, and if you keep delivering that value, they're going to come back to you because they're going to say, I can't do this on my own. I actually need you. And you have proved to me you know how to do this.
Yeah, one of the most beautiful things that I heard Chris talk about a long time ago that actually influenced kind of our strategy was not running ads for transaction, right? Like you were just talking about, getting somebody to come to your website and make a purchase, but running ads as a way to put targeted information in front of your audience to get them to consume that information natively in the feed. And I thought that was a very interesting approach that I had never really heard anybody talk about before the work that they did at Refine Labs. And so Chris has been incredibly influential on so many people, and I'm so glad that you brought him up.
Yeah, it's sales. If you start a business and you're running it and you're beginning it, you are the sales department. And so I don't know how to sell. I don't understand the mechanic. I mean, I understand the mechanics of it, and I'm a logical thinker, and I can break things apart. And but at the end of the day, I don't get deep into the sort of the sciencey stuff. But what I do like to listen to is, because I do have to get on the phone and I do have to sell what is my product, what is our business. Um, I like to listen to people like him, because he can he can talk to the senior vice president of business enterprise sales, and he can talk to a small business owner CEO, which is me. And that's the art of that's the shine of a really great communicator.
Communication is very interesting to me. And you and I previously talked about different types of communication. Now, I was introduced to you via a post that you were doing a presentation on the use of text messages and how you can use simple communication to engage behavioral health, mental health clients where they're at and help them eliminate barriers to access and more access to resources and support. Now, when we talk about innovation, you've talked about generative AI today. We've talked about a lot of interesting technology. But when we think about innovation, often people don't think about text messages. And one of the things that we share in our past is we're both chief innovation officers, right? We think about how to innovate in this space. And our mission here at Francis is to use text messages to be able to engage people in everyday scenarios, because we know that they pay attention to that communication channel, if you will.
Yeah.
So let's take a couple seconds to kind of riff on your passion for simple technology like text messages and why they make so much sense in helping us combat the problems that we see in the mental and behavioral health space.
Well, let's start there. Mental and behavioral health issues or challenges is naturally a disruption to a person's stability. So people are they're off kilter, right? They're not thinking rationally. They're challenged to make certain decisions. And so if you make the process of getting help or engaging in that help harder with more friction, they are not going to contribute to the healing process. They will turn away. I've watched it 1,000 times. I've seen really beautiful technology, well designed, with behavioral economists and behavioral scientists designing how it works. But it still had 1 to 2 to 3 more steps than necessary. When all I would have to do, if I just want to communicate with you or anybody else, I could just send you a text message and thank you for coming in today. It's private. It's not disruptive. It's already on a thing that's on their phone. They didn't have to download anything. And there's no friction. And so why not use that? Why not leverage those things, especially if you understand the nature of the challenge that sits before you, which is a behavioral health condition or a mental health or substance use problem. And so that's what I find really important. I used to do a lot of training for using digital technologies in recovery support, addiction care. And I would always start my talk with, name for me a technology you think you would love to have. If money wasn't an object, what technology would you like to help your people? And people would throw out all sorts of fancy stuff. And then I would say, which of those technologies do you think, or any technology that hasn't been mentioned, do you think actually gets the best engagement with your audience, with your people you serve? And they'd throw out different things. The answer to the question was the telephone. Everybody forgets about the telephone. Now, this was 10, 15 years ago. The way phones are used today is just a little bit different. If you're under the age of 30, you're not picking up the phone. Just not. But those things are still there. So I don't know. I know why, but like you, I want to advocate for the simple, because we're dealing with the very, very difficult. And we can't meet difficult with difficult, or else we won't get anywhere.
And when I think of innovation, I think of, a lot of the popularity, if you will. People think when innovation comes into a space, it's something brand new and something shiny, right? And so that's what my experience has been in healthcare since 2014. I saw all these incredibly smart people design these apps and these different tools and these portals that were so shiny and so interesting, and they would get the job done, but they never got the adoption that they really were designed for, because once again, they create that key word that you mentioned, which is friction between the experience of engagement. And when we talk about how the phone is utilized, right? I still remember the days when we had a home phone that was located in our house. We had the wire, and then it went wireless. Then we got caller ID. But then everybody started carrying this little device around. And so if we want to think about how we can tether, if you will, to somebody throughout their life journey, it's often through this little piece of technology that often is never farther than an arm's reach away from us. And so if we want to think about innovating, maybe it's coming to a solution from a different perspective rather than trying to reinvent the wheel all the time. But I feel like the technology culture that we live in says that if it's not new and if it's not a brand new approach, then it's not truly innovating. And I just think that that's kind of a misstep from the very beginning.
Yeah. So you just triggered two books that are two of my favorite books when we're talking about innovation. And sometimes we kind of try to get really creative and we like over innovate because we want the new and the shiny, as you said. And so there's two books that stick out that have always helped me. One is The Power of Moments from Chip and Dan Heath. So if you understand the journey, if you understand that every moment can be designed, not over designed, but designed. Like if I want to get you, Keenan, to pick up the phone when I call you, what did I do to set you up to be prepared to answer the phone? Like you have to think about those moments, right? So that's part one. That's book one. The other book is a book called Creative Trespassing from Talia Katan. She's phenomenal. And this is a simple idea throughout the entire book. She just talks about how do you look at everyday stuff that people just take for granted and have been designed a certain way and have existed a certain way forever, and you trespass on it. So like her claim to fame is she took the symbol of the ladies' room, of the woman stick figure, and you know how it sort of has like the triangle? She redrew that to make it look like the woman was wearing a cape as opposed to a dress. That's creative trespassing. Like we see the thing that we've always been told that we're supposed to see, but maybe there's something else there. And she didn't change the thing other than to say, no, I'm just going to draw this. I'm just going to add a couple of lines. And now it looks like she's wearing a cape. She's a superhero. You're a superhero. It completely changes the way people think about themselves or about the way that they can look at problems and solutions that are before them.
Wow. That is incredibly powerful because there is that different perspective, right? In the simplicity of the same thing, but just small iterations and small changes make a gigantic difference in how we perceive things, which is very interesting to me.
Yeah.
One of the words that you mentioned there is trespassing. So one of the questions that I have for you is you started your business in 2020, right? You guys are focusing on data and helping organizations weaponize that data to create better outcomes and better experiences for their clients and patients, which is phenomenal. But my question for you is, have you ever, from an innovation perspective, felt like and I'll mention this in a loving way, the old guard of how we've done things in the mental and behavioral health space has ever kind of put you in the place of trespassing to innovate in this space? But maybe people are like, we've been doing this the same way for the longest time. And that somewhat seems like the definition of insanity to me, doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting different results, but never getting them. So from an innovation perspective, do you feel like you've ever been looked at as a trespasser in this space?
I've always been looked at as a trespasser. I am not an insider. I am a divergent thinker by nature. I am a contrarian by nature. I do not like the status quo. And it doesn't bother me sitting in a room listening to dogma and tradition to just go against that grain. I will do it to the detriment of my reputation and business. At least I've done that in the past, because what I see is what you just described. At the end of that status quo are people's lives. that are not getting any better. And the way I look through the lens of the work that we do through three key indicators. So we're mostly working in substance use and addiction treatment. So there are three indicators that we have to pay attention to at the macro level to know whether or not we're moving the needle. Number one is, what's the rate of people that can walk into a treatment facility tomorrow or a therapist's office and be diagnosed with substance use disorder? That's about 46 million people in the United States today. It's enormous. It's up about 20 million from 2 years ago. It's incredible. So we're not, the status quo ain't helping that number go anywhere. It's actually making it worse. The second number is the rate of people that find recovery or overcome their addiction. That number has been going down as well. It's about 22 million in the United States. But when you adjust for population change, we went from about 11% of the population finding recovery to about 8%. So we're not getting better at that either. And the last one is overdose deaths. That number went from 50,000 about 8 or 9 years ago. It's now at 109, 110,000 a year. Unconscionable. So that's where my moral compass is at. It's like, what are we trying to solve for? If that's what we're trying to solve for is people not sick and people well, then whatever you're doing today, if it's not adjusting that in your local community, because all those numbers, which are global national numbers, we can take all the way down to the county. So I can look at Las Vegas, Nevada, and I could go, these are those numbers here. Let's pick a time frame. Let's pick some actions. If we don't change those numbers, then we got to figure out something else. And so that's the way I think of things. And I'm happy to be a contrarian in that space because that's all that matters. We have to move those numbers. And if we don't move them, we've got to adjust.
Yeah, a terrifying form of inflation, if you will, right? With these numbers that are happening in our community. I remember when we first got into the space in 2014, one of the biggest issues that we were dealing with from a telehealth innovation perspective was helping increase access to care in areas like the Midwest and Kentucky. So in 2014, there were hundreds of pain management doctors who had their licenses pulled because they were overprescribing. And now we're seeing the long-term effects of opiates in our communities. And one of the key revelations that I recently had because of an event that happened that many people are familiar with is addiction impacts so many different areas of our community. When I was growing up, I always thought of addiction or people who had substance use disorders in being in the lower threshold of society, right? Because they don't have access. So these people are in the streets and they're homeless and they're doing these type of things. But we recently saw that Matthew Perry passed away. And he was somebody who was a fundamental figure in social and pop culture by being a member of the Friends episodes. And he recently just passed away, and he released a book as well that talks about his struggles. And as I thought about that, it naturally created a sense of curiosity of how can somebody who's got so many material options for treatment and for recovery still find themselves battling this common challenge that so many people are facing. And it's not just the person who's homeless. It's not the person who is struggling with these addictions, but it's somebody who has all the resources in the world. And that was very eye-opening to me. And I think that story continues to be told. But I'd love to kind of hear your perspective on that dichotomy of access to resources and still battling with these challenges.
Yeah, growing up in the in the 90s and transitioning from high school to college in 1994 when Friends came out, that show was instrumental to my life. Every Thursday night in the dorm rooms and in our apartments was must see. And we would sit and watch Friends on Thursday night. We'd start to watch ER, but we were pre-gaming it and then go into the bars. And, I saw somebody talk about grief and why so many people with Matthew Perry are feeling a certain loss. Why is that? And what this person explained was, you don't know this person. You have no idea who they are, except that you saw them on TV. And he says, what that's about is you had an emotional connection to somebody during a certain period of time in your life. And for a lot of people, that was a growing up period of time. And so when I think about my connection to that, I was the guy sitting in that room watching that guy on TV, but struggling deeply behind, and I was the same thing, right? I could look like everybody else, consume alcohol just like everybody else, looks normal on the outside. But on the inside, yes, they looked like my friends, but there was something missing. It was a small F friend, not a capital F friend. And I think that's what has so many people talking about this event and exploring it, because you're right. He had, access to every resource. But what was really missing throughout all of that, he kind of talks about it in his book, it was just a deep disconnect from feeling wanted. And it wasn't until sort of overcoming that last mountain and getting to the other side where he could actually help other people. But here's what's interesting. I know people that know him or knew him who were his friend. Like, he helped a lot of people get well, even when he was struggling the most. And so it's mind boggling. It's one of those things where you have to sit and meditate on, because at the end of the day, deep in people's hearts, people are just not willing or able or capable or can't figure out how to make that connection. They want to, they just don't know how. And the people on the other side of the fence don't know how to do it either. And now today we live in a world with massive social disconnect, because we're all staring at screens and we're not hanging out in the places that we would typically, we're not hanging out in coffee shops with 6 or 7 friends around us. We go to coffee shops, but we put our headphones on, we put our computer in front of us, and we pay attention to nobody, and except for ourselves. And that worries me.
Yeah, the Surgeon General actually came on to television and talked about the biggest challenge that we face in society today is not a pandemic, it's not a virus breaking out, but it is this social isolation that people are dealing with. And I continue to worry, because when I look at the people in my community, when I'm in everyday scenarios, if I'm at Costco, if I'm at the gym, if I'm in a subway, or if I'm somewhere, everybody seems automatically drawn into their device, right? And this little device has created so many horrible experiences that we've become almost addicted to. You know what I mean? Anytime somebody feels uncomfortable in their scenario, they automatically whip out their device and they're already looking at this for an instantaneous release of dopamine, but that also micro sense of connection, that we feel good in the moment, but we don't have that same sense of community and people that we can lean on. And so I often think about, what is the long-term effect that these little devices and our natural, I would say, behavior to go whip onto our device creates, especially for the younger demographic as well, because we have a generation of people who are growing up addicted to these devices because it's a behavior that's been ingrained into their lifestyle for so long. And unless we have contrarian thinkers like you who are going to approach these problems differently, I don't think that we're going to see a massive turn that's going to take us into a better place in our society. And that really is concerning to me.
Yeah, a lot of this is because, like you and like we are working in a field that needs certain solutions in that last mile of help. And that's really necessary. But when I think about these things, I'm thinking way upstream. I look around my small community of, like 10,000 people in northern New York. We're a village. And, we have a barbershop, which is 2 dudes in their 50s and 60s that run this barbershop. Now, when you walk in there, now I'm not from here. I've been here for a few years, but I'm not local yet. But when you sit there and you're waiting to get your haircut, there's 6 other dudes, but there is a collective conversation going on. And because it's fall, we're talking about hunting, right? Hunting season opens. Where are you going? Where's the bucks hanging out at? And there is this collective sense of connection. And what's amazing to watch, because I'm kind of a social science nerd, is you'll see the mix of the older guys, the locals, versus the college students, because we've got 2 colleges in this town, 2 small schools. But when the college student is sitting there on their phone, when it's somebody slightly older or somebody who lives in that community, phone is down and they're talking about the Yankees or the Montreal Canadiens or whatever is the Buffalo Bills, which are kind of huge in this part. So,
Oh yeah.
so it's when I look at that, I go, okay, now how do we do that? How do we replicate that in a way in our communities and in our main streets, so that we have these moments where I don't know who any of those guys are, but I felt, and I could care less about hunting, but I was like, this is cool. I'd rather sit here and listen to this as opposed to anything else in this particular moment. It made me feel a little bit more connected to the place that I live and the people who live here, even though I probably have a lot. I'm not exactly like those people, if you will, but I felt better in the moment.
You've used two words there that stuck out to me: feel more connected to your community, right? And you felt better through that sense of connection. And that is so interesting, because often when I think about going to the barbershop and there's an ongoing conversation where everybody's just mingling and everybody's giving their 2 cents, you feel so much more recharged when you leave that environment, rather than sitting on your phone the entire time and then going back into your regular cycle. And I feel like it might be like an old school mentality, but there is no replacement, right, for that human connection and just sharing the space with each other. And that's something that I become, once again, concerned over, because I feel like we just don't have the opportunities to make those connections as much as we once did. And I'm not sure what the impacts of that are going to be on our downstream societies.
Yeah, I don't know. I think what's hard, and I'd be really curious in your reaction to this is, I had like deep ingrained social anxieties, right? I had difficult time talking to people and being out amongst people. Of course, that has dramatically changed. I still don't like talking to groups of people, but that's more of a I'm getting old and get off my lawn kind of thing. But what I'm really concerned about is I watch people who are 35 and younger, who really don't know how to engage in a conversation. Like they couldn't even imagine how to start one in a group of people. That's concerning, because we're not even having the moments where people can get socially acclaimed to their surroundings. And when we're not actually actively working on building that social ability, that social capital, now when your phone rings, you're never going to answer it because you're scared to death to actually talk to another human being. Now, when you go to the grocery store and you've got to ask for something, I don't like to ask for, directions because I'm a dude and I just don't. But if I was really engaged in wanting to find the thing, I'm going to go talk to somebody. If I really need to find it, I'm going to go talk to somebody. But I look at people now and they're so scared. They have no idea how to do that. And I would start there. Like if I had to start over, if I wasn't already running a thing, if I had to start over, I would teach conversation. I would teach people to go and really do that. Put the phone away. Let's go to the grocery store. Let's go to the restaurant. Let's talk about how you're going to talk to the waiter, the server, and have a conversation.
That's such an interesting concept to me, because I remember growing up and being younger and hearing older people say, your generation just doesn't know how to talk to anybody anymore. And when I was younger, I'd push back against that. I'd be like, yeah, because we can send text messages and it's so much easier. But now that I'm a little bit removed from the scenario and I have the perspective of the younger generation, I am also alarmed. And now I was lucky to be able to learn how to start conversations with different people because my family moved around so much when I was younger. I was born in Seattle, grew up in Detroit, moved to South Carolina, to Vegas, to Hawaii, now back to Vegas. And every single time I had to move to a new location, it meant implanting myself into a new social circle and having to have the conversations and introduce and understand what was going on to become part of that social ingrained ability to be wanted and to be liked and to be talked about and to have conversations. And I think today, because we have so much isolation in our communities and people aren't moving around as much as they once did, that's not a skill set that was mandatory. And so we see so many people who don't have the ability to engage with people. Because I do listen to friends often, and my girlfriend, her sister, they always joke around about the fact that when they would go to restaurants, that she would have to order for her younger sister. She wouldn't want to talk to the waitress, and she would be like, can you order me the mac and cheese or the chicken fingers? And that was something that she had to do, and they joke about that. But that's an ingrained behavior that still comes up because often we don't like going out into social situations. This last weekend, she had mentioned that she wanted to go out for Halloween, but none of her friends wanted to go out. And so she also didn't want to go out because she's like, I don't want to go out alone. Who am I going to talk to? And naturally, I started thinking about, well, that's the opportunity for you to go out and mingle and socialize and meet new people. And you're never going to get those chances to connect with others if you don't put yourself in that environment.
Yeah. If we want to take this back to innovation in business, it almost feels innovative now if you create your customer service built on actual conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So we have found that there are some of our competitors that want their customers to go through a portal and to use a ticketing system, and there's no response there. And so we're talking to people that are potential customers, and they're saying, we're not even a customer yet, but we've called you 3 times and you pick up the phone every time. What is going on? And we're like, yeah, it's because the bar is so low. And all we have to do is just talk to you. We might not have the best product. This is a Seth Godin thing. We just shipped it. It's not the best. It could be better. It could always be better. But where can we be better? What can we control? We can control how we communicate with you. And we can answer the phone. We can schedule a meeting. We can make sure we talk. We'll get on a plane. We'll come see you. We'll go see the way you do your thing. Why do we want to do that? Because we think that's how life works. Yeah, of course, I can get you on my website and you can go click a button and you can pay for the thing and you can get the software without ever talking to us. Some people are going to choose that. What I think most people want when you're dealing with the business that you and I deal in is they actually want to see us in the room. I've watched some of your videos where you've brought the phone into a meeting, a conversation, which I find kind of a little unnerving. Someone who's slightly older than you. But it's just fascinating to watch you and your business partner in those meetings, having those conversations with customers. Like, that's where it's at. And I think a lot more people just need to be exposed to that and do it for real.
And that was a big part of why we started recording those meetings, not only to be able to review them later, but also to show the humanality of what we were doing. And it's like, we are actually going to show up and be here with you and have these conversations. And my father always told me that relationships are the fundamental bedrock of business. And when I was younger, I didn't really believe that. But now that I'm older, I start to think that the people who you work with, and this is a great analogy. Somebody asked me one time, are you guys a B2C business or a B2B business? And I respond and say, we are a P2P business. We are a people to people business. And that is something that is a differentiator because everybody else wants to go fully automated and they want to take out the humanality and the human connection of doing business. And I think a secret part of us really yearns for the time when you could actually call somebody up, answer a question, ask a question, and have that dialogue. Because now, working with different companies like Shutterfly or these different other companies where you have to submit a ticket and you never talk to anybody ever, the experience in that is quick, but it misses that human connection, which is so interesting.
Yeah, I find that just today, as a matter of fact, I went through a list of leads and people that we want to do business with, and kind of things that were just stragglers, right? Things where the grass is starting to grow. And I just pick up the phone and I call their mobile phone, I call their office phone, and finally people just pick up. And when you're on a phone like that, you can say to them, look, I don't want to waste your time. You don't want to waste my time. Are we going to do business or not? And it gets awkward, but they'll go, yeah, no, we're not going to. And I'm like, great. That's all I wanted to know. I'm glad I got to meet you. I'm glad I got to see the way that you operate. I think you're good people. And by the way, if I'm ever needing somebody who needs to go to treatment in Arizona, I know where to send them. I can trust you. And when you do that, you plant a seed. I'm never going to win their business, but you've planted a seed. They're going to remember you. You're going to remember them. And I just think that people don't consider that enough when they're starting companies or starting a new company. Pick up the phone, talk. You can get more done in a phone conversation in 4 minutes than you can spending 40 minutes trying to write the perfect email.
Absolutely true. I was going to talk about some more AI, but I feel like this is a perfect transition into the humanality of business. Now, I have a book next to me, and one of my favorite business leaders today is a guy named Gary Vaynerchuk. He has a book called 12 and a half, right? And it's the soft skills and the emotional ingredients necessary for business success. So I watched you recently on another podcast where you were talking about implementing a 4-day work week. And I would rather say, instead of implementing, but suggesting a 4-day work week. Now, that is a huge change from, I would say, the work culture that we came from in the past. Why were you motivated to be able to lean into a 4-day work week? And did you have any hesitancy about the human nature to not do as much as we can when we have a shorter work window? Or why did you lean into that so much?
Science. We're a well-being company, and we go to places to say the data says do this. And the lean in is, well, if we're not practicing the latest in science around workplace culture, overall well-being, health, if we're not practicing in those things, and I'm not the best at it, to be candid, then who are we to come into your business and say that you should do this, right? So that's really the reason. What it has done, though, is it's created a really great conversation amongst our team. Now, we don't operate on a 4-day work week, but because we're an early stage company and got a lot of work to do. But what we do is, let's say, so Patrick, he was at a conference for 3 days. If I don't hear from him tomorrow, and if he just sends me a text in the morning and it says, I think I just need to take most of the day, done. I get it. You were working a room for 3 days. That's exhausting. We're going to pick it up and be stronger next week. And I know he's going to do stuff over the weekend too anyway, because he's the co-founder. He's going to do that work. That's why it's like, let's figure out how we can say, let's be fresh. Tomorrow, we're actually implementing a weekly pulse, a set of questions, and we added some questions to it. The questions actually start with going into the week. If you look at your energy as a gas tank, how close to full was it Monday morning? Now it's Friday morning, Friday afternoon, like Friday mid-noon. Now where's your gas tank? And we're going to experiment with that data and just see. So we're going to be data driven. And if we come and find that by Friday morning everybody's just trashed, why would we do work on Friday if we don't have the energy to be productive and be effective? Let's take the break. So I think it's just data driven. What does the science say? Follow the science and do it, and then see what happens. And if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. If it does, do it.
I think that's so powerful because a couple different reasons. One of which is you're making decisions based on data. We're not just trying to implement, I would say, blanket policies that we don't really know if they understand or if they work and understand what the true effectiveness on them really is. But the other thing that you said there was very powerful to me was you basically are not trying to convince people. You guys are a well-being company, right? There's a natural intuition as people of being able to understand and have an intuition of what BS really looks like. Because there are a lot of organizations out there who say you have unlimited like vacation days and PTO, take as many as you want. But as soon as you take those days, they kind of look at you with a little bit of a glare because they understand that you're kind of taking advantage of the policy. And from my perspective, that is not a human focused organization strategy because you're hurting people for taking advantage of the things that you give them rather than truly walking the walk, right? Being able to walk the walk and convincing people based on your philosophy and living through it, I think is just an incredibly powerful business strategy, but also just a human being strategy as well.
Yeah. I mean, so here's always the challenge. Organizations that have schedules and particular hours where they're doing like restaurants and other things, they're like, well, we can't do unlimited time off. That just wouldn't work. And my challenge is, well, I ran a peer support organization where we had to have coaches in the office during certain periods of times, and they had to do certain number of sessions per week. We had an unlimited office or unlimited PTO policy. How did we make it work? We made it work by using logic technology, right? We used mapping of who had to work when and where, and we could figure out using technology of, okay, Keenan had to work on Mondays and Tuesdays. Those were your days always. But maybe like Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, you could do whatever you want with those days within reason, right? And everybody had to be thinking, for the most part, 3 to 4 weeks ahead. So once you have everybody thinking 3 to 4 weeks ahead. I know life happens, and sometimes the dog gets sick or the kid has to go to the thing, and that's different. But for like vacations, and if you're like a team that's manageable, you can sit in a room as a team and go, all right, David, when do you think you're going to do your family vacation? 7 days, 10 days, 40 days? What are you going to do? You're going to go work remotely somewhere? You're going to do a vacation and a work away? Awesome. You're going to be in Seattle for a month. Cool. 10 days are off, 20 days are on, remote. Love it. Like, now you can start to get people to think a bit more creatively about how they do their job, where they do their job. They can lean into not missing life, but showing up as much as they can in the work that they do. I saw somebody say the other day, or it was something on, maybe it was Instagram Reels, and they were just making the point that nobody can give 100% 100% of the time. It's impossible. And so if we just like understand what that means and you build that into your culture, people will give you everything they can, as much as they can. And you have to accept that.
This reminds me of a culture example, and where some of the best innovation that we've experienced in society has come from. Google is a great example. One time I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about where Gmail came from. And they were talking about the underlying cultural expectation of working on Google-based products 4 days of the week. And then on your fifth day, you could work on whatever you wanted. And that's where tools like Gmail came from, because people had enough freedom to use their creativity to think, how can I innovate and how can I create something that I'm passionate about? And that is a perfect example of how a culture that is based on people creates better results and creates more innovation and creativity. And at the end of the day, really impacts society in so many different ways. And I thought that was just absolutely amazing.
Yeah. And you know what's interesting about that example, because I've studied that and I've talked to people at Google who've experienced it. In order for that to work, you can't just have like a naturally freewheeling organization. It can't be. You have to start from a place of discipline and rigor. So Google's very disciplined. Right? They have objectives and key results, and they flow throughout the entire organization. And everybody knows what everybody is supposed to do. And it's very rigorous. And so there is no day that no employee doesn't know where they are against the objectives that they're working on. And if they are behind in those objectives, that extra 10% to go do other stuff goes away. Because we have to get job one done first. But then once that's happening and you're getting into that flow and you're keeping up on the results that you're supposed, now time starts to get freed because everybody's performing at a peak performance. And that allows that other, I've got 3 hours left in my day today. I don't need to work on the thing over there because we're on schedule. What is this email thing we're doing? What is this new communications tool? Okay, let's go work on that. So I think that's what people miss about that story is it does take a lot of discipline to stay within your strategic priorities, with your objectives, your goals, and then figure out now where can we make the room and how do we empower people to understand that.
Yeah, that's a beautiful insight, because freedom really does not come without discipline, right? The freedom feels better when you've been in lock mode and you've been disciplined and you're executing on your tasks. And then when you have the opportunity to spread your wings and be creative, it feels so much more rewarding. And it does make sense that that wouldn't be a willy-nilly, if you will, organization who's just like, work on your stuff for 4 days and then we'll see what happens on your fifth day when you create other kind of innovations. That's really cool. I like that a lot.
They wouldn't be Google if they didn't have that level of restriction. And the best thing comes from what? Pressure. Mm-hmm. Constraint and restriction. When you add constraint and restriction to what you do, I think it's why a lot of people, I'm a procrastinator. And I think it's why a lot of procrastinators tend to turn out really decent work. Like it goes against what that should be. But the constraint for some of us, we find really great stuff in the shrinkage of time. And so for people like me, what we have to do is we have to figure out, okay, how do I restructure my time to take advantage of that very thing. And so for me, I sometimes will like, oh, I've got 30 days to get a thing done. No, I'm not starting it now. I could do it now, but forget it. I'm not going to get good work done. So I'm going to wait. I'm going to schedule it for the last 7 days. And I just have to block everything else around that time management so that I get that constraint to work for me as opposed to against me. And I think like this conversation is great because I think that's where we start to get into like, how does the human mind work? How do I work? And if you can figure that out, like for you, and you can see that in other people, you can start to navigate and manage people better as opposed to managing against like arbitrary whatever. Manage to people's gifts. Understand how they work. And when you understand how they work, then you can set up the parameters to make them successful.
And is this one of the changes? I saw this post on Instagram last night, and this guy was talking to, I would say, very successful entrepreneurs, and they were talking about the difference in being a hustler and being a CEO, and the difference in success that you see in those two different things. One is being a hustler, showing up every single day and grinding, which so many people want to do. But the other level of success is being a CEO and being able to understand people to get the most out of your team, which is very interesting. So you as a CEO and as a founder, I understand that your emphasis on human behavior and getting the most out of people is going to be a huge driver of your success because you take it so seriously, but you're also using hard metrics such as data to be able to help justify and push forward your initiatives like your 4-day work week. I think that's so powerful.
Yeah, there's an art and a science to all of this. And some companies are going to have a culture that operates a little bit differently, and that's going to be based upon personality. It's going to be based on whatever. Yeah, but my experience has been just watching the people that I've got to learn from, people who I would call mentors, watching how they as leaders look for really kind of two things. Can I spot the gifts in people, and can I help them leverage those gifts? And then two, can I figure out what I need to say yes to make the organization successful versus the way more many things I need to say no to and give to somebody else to make the organization successful. The hustle culture is yes, 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 yes. And that doesn't last.
There's really is a key element of burnout, right? We see so much happening in healthcare and just across the spectrum of work today, which is so interesting. And so I love when I talk to leaders like you who have an emphasis on culture. So I'm going to use the last couple of minutes of our conversation today to pull 4 examples from the 12 and a half ingredients that Gary Vaynerchuk talks about for business success. And I want to hear your input on how you leverage them in your organization or personally, and how they kind of push your vision forward. The first is gratitude. How does gratitude impact your business, your personal life, and how do you leverage it to be more successful?
It's just a constant recognition to all the people who you work with. So it doesn't have to show up as, Keenan, I'm grateful for you today. And it doesn't have to be like that. It could be very as simple as, for instance, Patrick, who doesn't come from the addiction recovery world. He has zero fear about the entrenched in our field. But he got somebody who I've known forever in the addiction recovery space to finally get what we're doing. I've talked to this person 1,000 times. And I just sent a simple note and I go, you realize you moved a mountain. Like, that's gratitude.
That's incredibly powerful. The next is self-awareness.
Well, so because of my own history with depression and spending a lot of time with therapists and counselors, I have trained myself that the moment I wake up, I do a check of me. Do I feel off today? Is this a dark day or is this a good day? Do I hurt? Did I get rest? That's how my day starts. You can put that into your business. You can put that into your personal life. But it's constant. It's a constant. The product we sell is about self-awareness. It's an inventory. It's an assessment for do an inventory on yourself. That is self-awareness. So that's constant in my life.
Sorry, we froze there for a second. So I'll chop this back together.
Yeah.
So the next question that I have for you is accountability.
Well, again, with my own personal journey around overcoming addiction, there are things that happen when you experience that where you've hurt a lot of people, and so you can the fails don't have to be so big, but even if they're small, just saying to people, "That was my bad." That's accountability. That was my bad. I'll take responsibility for it, but here's what we're going to do next. And I'm going to say we're going to do X, Y, and Z next. So that's what I said we're going to do. If we don't do it, you got to tell me. Like, you have to feed that cycle. So if you don't give people permission to hold you accountable, they won't. So that's the other part of it. You can hold yourself accountable, but that requires your own willpower. Sometimes you have to say to other people, "Hey, Keenan, I need you. I said I was going to do this. Come back at me in a week. And if I didn't, please tell me I didn't."
Yeah, accountability is something that I often speak about because I find that, especially in the world of business, as an example, in the world of life today, it's so easy for us to cast blame on why certain things are happening or why results didn't occur. But I found the inverse of taking accountability, extreme accountability for the work that we do, doing what we say we're going to, like you just said, creates so many opportunities for power to be transferred to you. And when you take accountability for your situation and everything that you have control over, it really frees you up from any of the outside forces that really are, the casting of blame and really which is the giving away of power in your personal life. So I love that one. And the last one that I have for you here, David, is ambition. How does ambition play a role in your vision for your company, being a startup and going into battle every single day to continue to push forward your vision? How does ambition kind of get balanced in your life?
Ambition is an interesting question because, I've studied history, and I've studied history around, say, the founding fathers, and in politics. Ambition was always something that was feared because it would create a corruption of how people did what they did. And so I am in a position where I see that as sort of a double-edged sword. And what I want to do is just be ambitious towards our goals, not necessarily trying to eat the world or eat the elephant. So the ambition is much more tighter than it is wider. But yeah, it's an interesting thing, and I don't know if I've got a full lock on it.
Well, guys, that's been another episode of the Hart Hustle Podcast. Once again, let's thank David Whitesock for coming here today, talking about these important topics like innovation, how we're going to be able to overcome the challenges of trespassing in a space that's so ingrained, such as mental and behavioral health. More importantly, thank him for the time that he is spending in creating a new workforce culture and being able to push his organization forward by leading by example, not only from the things that he does on a daily basis, but also from the data that he is gathering throughout his process. Once again, this has been the Hart and Hustle Podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in once again, and I hope you guys have an amazing day. Thanks so much.